The winter of 1876 brought more than just snow to the Blackwood homestead. When Martha Blackwood ventured out during a blizzard and vanished without a trace, her husband Thomas was left devastated. The entire settlement feared the worst, until 3 months later, when Martha returned, not alone, but with a Lakota brave named Swift Arrow. The whispers began immediately. Who was this man? Why had Martha brought him to their home? And what was the secret she carried that would forever change the course of their lives and challenge everything their small frontier community believed about loyalty, love, and the divide between two worlds? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas Blackwood's calloused hands gripped the wooden frame of the cabin window as he peered out at the approaching storm. Dark clouds hung low over the Dakota Territory, promising the worst blizzard of the season. The wind already howled through the cracks of their modest homestead, a place he and Martha had built with their own hands after journeying west from Pennsylvania 3 years earlier. "Martha, I don't think you should go," Thomas said, turning to face his wife, who was wrapping a thick woolen scarf around her neck. "The Hendersons can manage without the medicine. No one should be out in this weather." Martha Blackwood looked up, her green eyes reflecting the determination that had carried her through the hardships of frontier life. At 26, she still possessed the same spirit that had made Thomas fall in love with her back in their hometown of Willow Creek. "Emma Henderson's fever hasn't broken in 3 days, Thomas. The elderberry tonic will help, and I promised Sarah I'd bring it." She tucked a strand of auburn hair beneath her bonnet. "Their homestead is less than an hour's ride. I'll be back before the worst of the storm hits." Thomas knew there was no changing his wife's mind once it was set. It was one of the qualities he both admired and found maddening about her. Martha had always been different from other settler women, learned herbal remedies from her grandmother, unafraid to speak her mind, and impossibly stubborn when she believed she was right. "At least take my rifle," Thomas insisted, reaching for the weapon mounted above the door. Martha shook her head. "It will only weigh me down. Maple knows the way, and I'll be fine." She reached up to touch his bearded cheek. "I promise I'll turn back if the weather worsens." With reluctance, Thomas helped Martha mount their chestnut mare. The sky was darkening rapidly now, the first heavy snowflakes beginning to fall. He watched her ride toward the tree line that separated their homestead from the small cluster of cabins that made up the Clearwater settlement. Something twisted in his gut, a premonition perhaps, but he pushed it aside. Martha had always been capable. What Thomas couldn't know was that this would be the last time he would see his wife for 3 long months. When Martha hadn't returned by nightfall, Thomas saddled his stallion, despite the raging blizzard, and rode to the Hendersons' cabin. The terror in his heart turned to confusion when Sarah Henderson opened her door, her face a mask of concern. "Martha?" "She never arrived, Thomas. We thought she must have turned back when the storm worsened." For 7 days, every able-bodied man in Clearwater searched. They found Maple 2 miles south of the settlement, the saddlebag still containing the elderberry tonic, but of Martha there was no sign. As weeks turned to months, hope faded. The community grieved with Thomas, but whispers began that he should accept his wife's fate and move on. Even Pastor Mitchell gently suggested a memorial service. Thomas refused. "I would know if she were gone," he insisted, tapping his chest. "I would feel it here." Winter's grip on the territory remained firm as January gave way to February. Thomas maintained his daily routine, tending the livestock, chopping wood, repairing tools, but the light had gone from his eyes. Each night he would light a lantern and place it in the window, a beacon should Martha somehow find her way home. On the first day of March, when the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks, Thomas was splitting logs behind the cabin when he heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. He dropped his axe, heart pounding as he ran to the front of the homestead. 2 riders approached. The first, to his astonishment, was Martha, thinner, her face more weathered, but unmistakably his wife. Behind her rode a man Thomas had never seen before, dressed in a mixture of traditional Lakota clothing and what appeared to be traded goods. The brave sat tall on his paint horse, his long black hair in 2 braids, dark eyes warily scanning. "The homestead! Martha!" Thomas ran toward them, nearly slipping on the melting snow. He reached for her as she dismounted, pulling her into an embrace so tight she gasped. "My God, Martha, where have you been? We searched everywhere. I thought—" "I'm alive, Thomas," she said softly, a voice different somehow, steadier, more certain. "And I've brought someone with me. This is Swift Arrow." The Lakota man nodded but remained on his horse, one hand resting casually near what Thomas recognized as a hunting knife. "I don't understand," Thomas said, looking between his wife and the stranger. "Where were you? How did you survive the blizzard? And why is he—" He couldn't finish the question. Martha placed a hand on his arm. "I have much to tell you, but first we need to come inside. It's been a long journey, and we're both exhausted." Thomas felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief, confusion, and something darker he couldn't name. The presence of the Lakota brave made him uneasy. Relations between settlers and the Lakota had been tense since General Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn the previous summer. Many in Clearwater still harbored deep mistrust toward all native people. "Of course," he finally said, standing aside. "Come in." Inside the cabin, Martha moved with strange hesitation, as though reacquainting herself with a place once familiar. She ran her fingers over the quilt she had made, touched the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and stood before the fireplace where Thomas had kept a flame burning throughout her absence. Swift Arrow remained near the door, declining Thomas's awkward gesture toward a chair. His presence filled the small cabin with an unmistakable tension. "You must be hungry," Thomas said to Martha, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "I can make you something—" "Thomas," Martha interrupted, removing her bonnet to reveal hair that had grown longer during her absence. "I need to explain what happened." She sat at the table, and after a moment's hesitation, Thomas joined her. Swift Arrow remained standing, his gaze fixed on Martha as though waiting for something. "The storm came on faster than I expected," Martha began. "Maple panicked when lightning struck nearby. She threw me and bolted. I hit my head when I fell." She touched a small scar near her temple that Thomas hadn't noticed before. "I would have frozen to death if Swift Arrow hadn't found me." Thomas glanced at the Lakota man. "You saved her?" Swift Arrow spoke for the first time, his English careful but clear. "I was hunting, found her in the snow, spirit leaving her body. He brought me to his village," Martha continued. "I was unconscious for days. By the time I awoke, another blizzard had come. There was no way to send word or return safely." Thomas frowned. "But that doesn't explain why it took 3 months, Martha. The worst of the storms passed weeks ago." Martha and Swift Arrow exchanged a look that sent a chill through Thomas. There was an understanding between them, a silent communication that made him feel suddenly like an outsider in his own home. "I was injured, Thomas. Moving was difficult and—" She took a deep breath. "And I learned things during my time with the Lakota, things that changed me." "What things?" Thomas asked, his voice hardening. "What aren't you telling me, Martha?" Before she could answer, a knock at the door startled them all. Swift Arrow's hand moved to his knife, but Thomas rose to answer it. Standing on his porch were William Fletcher, Clearwater's unofficial leader, and Ethan Burke, who owned the trading post. Thomas, word spreading that— William's voice cut off as he spotted Martha at the table. "Good Lord, it's true. Martha, you're alive!" His smile of relief faltered when he noticed Swift Arrow, And you've brought company. Ethan's hand drifted toward the revolver on his hip. Everything all right here, Thomas? Everything's fine, Thomas said quickly, though he wasn't entirely convinced himself. Martha was just explaining how this man saved her life during the blizzard. William removed his hat, but his eyes remained fixed on Swift Arrow. Well, that's mighty fortunate, then. We should let everyone know you're back safe, Martha. There'll be quite a celebration, I expect. Martha stood. I've only just returned, William. I need rest before I'm ready for visitors. Of course, William nodded. But, your friend here, he'll be heading back to his people now, I assume? The question hung in the air. Thomas realized he'd been wondering the same thing, but hadn't asked it directly. Swift Arrow stays, Martha said firmly. At least for now. I wouldn't be alive without him. Ethan's expression darkened. Thomas, can I have a word outside? Reluctantly, Thomas stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. The two men moved a few paces from the cabin. Have you lost your mind? Ethan hissed. You can't have a Lakota staying here, not after Little Bighorn. People are already talking. He saved my wife's life, Thomas replied, though his own misgivings echoed Ethan's concern. And for that, we're grateful, William interjected, his tone more diplomatic. But Thomas, surely you can see how this looks. Your wife disappears for 3 months and returns with a Lakota brave? People will talk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let them talk, Thomas said with more confidence than he felt. Martha's home, that's all that matters right now. William placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. We're glad she's safe, truly. But this situation, it's unusual. Just be careful, Thomas. Not everyone will be as understanding as us. After the men left, Thomas returned. To find Martha and Swift Arrow in quiet conversation, they fell silent when he entered, reinforcing his feeling of exclusion. They're right about one thing, Thomas said. People will talk. Clearwater isn't known for its tolerance, Martha. You know that. Martha's expression hardened. And you? What do you think, Thomas? The question caught him off guard. I'm grateful. He saved you. But there's more to this story, isn't there? I know you, Martha. You're holding something back. Martha exchanged another look with Swift Arrow, who gave a slight nod. She took a deep breath and placed her hands flat on the table. During the months I lived with Swift Arrow's people, I was welcomed into their community. I learned their ways, their beliefs. I saw how they live in harmony with the land instead of trying to conquer it as we do. She paused. But most importantly, I learned the truth about myself, about my grandmother. Thomas frowned. Your grandmother, the one who taught you about herbs, what does she have to do with this? My grandmother's name was Margaret Collins, but before that she was known as Morning Sky. She was Lakota, Thomas. She was taken as a young girl by settlers, renamed and raised to forget her heritage. Thomas stared at his wife in disbelief. That's not possible. You never mentioned... Because I never knew, Martha interrupted. My mother kept it a secret. She was ashamed. But when Swift Arrow's grandmother saw me, she recognized something, features perhaps, or the way I worked with the herbs. She knew stories of a girl taken decades ago. Swift Arrow spoke. Our elders remember. Stories passed down. Martha has Lakota blood. She belongs to 2 worlds. Thomas struggled to process this revelation. So you're saying you're part Lakota? Even if that's true, Martha, it doesn't explain why you couldn't return sooner, or why you've brought him here now. Martha rose from the table and walked to the small trunk where she kept her most precious possessions. From it she withdrew a leather-bound journal. My grandmother kept this. I never could read her strange markings, but I kept it to remember her. She opened it to reveal pages filled with symbols Thomas didn't recognize. It's Lakota, not writing, as we know it. but a way of recording important knowledge about healing, about plants, about visions. Martha, I had a vision while I was with Swift Arrow's people, Thomas, a powerful one. Her voice grew intense. I saw two paths, one of continued conflict between our peoples, leading to suffering and death, and another path, one of understanding, of bridge building. Thomas ran a hand through his hair in frustration. So you've brought him here because of a dream? Do you realize what you're risking? Not just your reputation, but your safety. Our safety. Swift Arrow stepped forward. Not just dream, great vision. Martha stands between worlds now, has a purpose. And what purpose is that exactly? Thomas demanded. Martha placed the journal on the table to begin healing the divide between our peoples, starting here in Clearwater. There's a reason I survived that storm, Thomas, a reason I was led to Swift Arrow's people. Thomas looked at his wife as though seeing a stranger. Martha, who had left 3 months ago, would never have spoken like this. And what about us? He asked quietly. Where do I fit into this vision of yours? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Martha's face. That depends on you, Thomas, on whether you can open your mind to a different truth than the one you've been taught. Before Thomas could respond, Swift Arrow tensed, his gaze fixed on the window. Riders coming! Thomas moved to look outside and felt his stomach drop. A group of 6 men on horseback approached, led by Sheriff Miller and including some of the settlement's most vocal opponents of the native tribes. All were armed. They must have heard from William and Ethan, Thomas said grimly. Martha, this is exactly what I was afraid of. Martha joined him at the window, her face resolute. Then this is where it begins, Thomas, the choice between 2 paths. She turned to face him fully. The question is, which path will you choose? As the riders drew closer, Thomas found himself caught between worlds. The community he'd been part of for 3 years and the wife he'd thought lost forever, now returned with a truth that challenged everything he believed. The secret Martha had brought back wasn't just about her heritage. It was a turning point that would force everyone in Clearwater to confront their deepest prejudices and fears. And as Sheriff Miller's voice called out his name, Thomas knew that the decision he made in the next few moments would change not just his own life, but potentially the future of relations between settlers and the Lakota in this small corner of the Dakota Territory. The storm that had taken Martha months ago had passed, but Thomas could feel a different kind of tempest gathering now, one that would test not just his love for his wife, but his courage to stand against the tide of history itself. Sheriff Miller dismounted first, his weathered face set in hard lines beneath his wide-brimmed hat. The 5 men behind him remained on horseback, creating an imposing half-circle around the front of the Blackwood cabin. Thomas recognized Jacob Walsh, a rancher who'd lost family in a skirmish with Lakota. Warriors 2 years prior, the Reed brothers, known for their quick tempers. Reverend Abernathy, whose sermons often painted native peoples as heathens in need of salvation. And Frank Donnelly, who'd served briefly with Custer before settling in Clearwater. Thomas, Sheriff. Miller nodded, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. Word spreading faster than wildfire. Figured I'd best come see for myself. His eyes drifted to the doorway where Martha now stood, Swift Arrow's silhouette visible just behind her. Mrs. Blackwood, it's a blessing to see you alive. Thomas stepped forward, positioning himself between the armed men and his porch. As you can see, Sheriff, my wife has returned safely. We're grateful for your concern, but we'd appreciate some time to ourselves. Sheriff Miller removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. His tone remained cordial, but his eyes never left Swift Arrow. Of course, Thomas. It's just that William Fletcher mentioned Martha wasn't alone, said she brought back a visitor. He saved my life, Martha called out, moving to stand beside Thomas. "I'd have died in that blizzard if not for Swift Arrow and his people." Frank Donnelly spat on the ground. "His people? The same ones who massacred our boys at Little Bighorn?" "Frank," the sheriff warned, raising a hand. Swift Arrow stepped onto the porch, his posture straight and proud. The men tensed visibly, hands moving closer to weapons. "Different band," Swift Arrow said calmly. "Not all Lakota are the same. Not all white men are the same." Jacob Walsh's face reddened. "You got some nerve bringing him here, Martha. After what they did to my brother's family. After what some Lakota did," Martha corrected firmly. "Just as some settlers have done terrible things to the Lakota. The cycle of vengeance has to end somewhere, Jacob." Reverend Abernathy leaned forward in his saddle. "Martha, my dear, you've clearly been through an ordeal. Perhaps your mind has been influenced. Why don't you come stay at the church until you're thinking clearly again?" Thomas felt a flash of anger. "My wife is thinking perfectly clearly, Reverend, and she'll be staying right here with me." Sheriff Miller sighed heavily. "Thomas, I understand your gratitude to this man. But surely you see that his presence here puts everyone in a difficult position. There's already talk in town." "What kind of talk?" Thomas asked, though he could guess. The older Reed brother, Isaiah, answered bluntly. "Talk that your wife might have gone willingly with the Injun. That 3 months is a long time to be lost." Thomas lunged forward, but Martha caught his arm. "That's a lie," he growled. "Is it?" Isaiah pressed. "Then why'd she bring him back? Why's she defending their kind?" Martha's grip on Thomas's arm tightened. "Because I've learned the truth about who I am," she said loudly enough for all to hear. "My grandmother was Lakota, taken from her people as a child. I have Lakota blood running through my veins." A stunned silence fell over the group. Even Sheriff Miller seemed at a loss for words. "That's impossible," Reverend Abernathy finally said. "Margaret Collins was a God-fearing Christian woman. I met her myself when she visited years ago. She was both," Martha insisted, "renamed and forced to forget her heritage, but Lakota by birth. Swift Arrow's grandmother remembered her. The knowledge my grandmother passed to me about healing, it came from her Lakota upbringing." Ex-Frank Donnelly laughed harshly. "Convenient story. Next you'll be saying you're some kind of witch doctor." "Show respect," Swift Arrow said sharply, taking a step forward. Several guns were immediately drawn. Sheriff Miller moved quickly between. Both sides, hands raised. "Everyone calm down. No need for this to turn ugly." Thomas made a decision then. He moved to stand shoulder to shoulder with Martha and Swift Arrow on the porch. "Sheriff, I appreciate your concern, but this is my property. My wife has returned home, and her friend is our guest. Unless you have some law against a man having visitors, I'll thank you for leaving us be." Sheriff Miller studied Thomas's face, then glanced at the armed men behind him. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "No law against visitors, that's true enough. But Thomas, Martha, I can't guarantee how folks will react to this. Tensions are high since Little Bighorn. Best keep your guest out of sight." "He has a name," Martha said. "Swift Arrow, and hiding him away would defeat the purpose." "Of why we're here, and what purpose is that exactly?" Sheriff Miller asked warily. Martha stepped forward. "To begin healing the wounds between our peoples, to show that understanding is possible. Sheriff, the Lakota aren't going anywhere, and neither are we settlers. The land is big enough for all if we can learn to share it." Frank Donnelly scoffed. "The Army'll have something to say about that, Mrs. Blackwood." "Perhaps," Martha acknowledged, "but here in Clearwater we could start something different, something better." Sheriff Miller replaced his hat. "Bold words, Martha, but words alone won't change minds that are set against each other." He turned to Thomas. "I'll do what I can to keep the peace, but I can't promise anything. Some folks have lost too much to forgive." As the men rode away, Thomas watched them go with a growing sense of foreboding. When they were out of earshot, he turned to Martha. "You realize what you've done? You've put a target on our backs." Martha's expression remained resolute. "We were always going to face resistance, Thomas, but if we don't stand firm now, nothing will ever change." Later that evening, as twilight settled over the homestead, Thomas sat across from Swift Arrow at the kitchen table while Martha prepared a simple meal. The silence between the men was heavy with unspoken questions. "How did you find her?" Thomas finally asked. "In the blizzard, I mean." Swift Arrow considered his words carefully. "I hunt elk that day, see horse running without rider, follow tracks in snow before wind cover them, find Martha under a fallen tree, snow already covering her." He made a gesture toward his chest. "Breath very weak. Carry her back to village." Thomas nodded slowly. "And when she woke?" "Many days later. Fever, bad dreams. Old grandmother tend her wounds. Say Martha has a strong spirit." Thomas glanced toward Martha, who was focused on her cooking. "And this discovery about her grandmother, how did that happen?" Swift Arrow tilted his head. "Old ones have long memory. Grandmother saw Martha's face, the way she moved her hands when mixing medicines. Said she looked like a girl taken many winters ago. Then Martha showed journal with old symbols, and you believe this?" Swift Arrow's dark eyes held Thomas's gaze steadily. "Blood remembers, even when the mind forgets. Martha knows things she never taught. Her hands remember the old ways." Thomas leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What exactly happened between you and my wife during those 3 months?" Swift Arrow didn't flinch. "I teach Martha our language, our ways. She teach me your words, your customs. We learn to see through each other's eyes." "That's not what I'm asking," Thomas pressed. "Thomas," Martha interrupted, setting down 3 bowls of stew. "Whatever you're thinking, stop." Swift Arrow respected a marriage. He's a man of honor. Then why did he come back with you? Why risk his life to enter a settlement where most would gladly see him dead? Swift Arrow accepted the bowl Martha offered. "Because vision showed our paths joined, 3 paths becoming one." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "3 paths?" Martha sat beside Thomas, her hand covering his. "Yours, mine, and his, Thomas. The vision showed us working together to create understanding between our peoples." Thomas withdrew his hand. "A vision. Martha, listen to yourself. You disappear for 3 months and return talking about visions and secret heritage. How am I supposed to make sense of this?" "With an open heart," she answered simply. "The same way I had to make sense of discovering my grandmother's truth." They ate in silence for several minutes before Thomas spoke again. "What happens now? You can't expect Clearwater to suddenly embrace Swift Arrow or your ideas about coexistence." "No," Martha agreed, "but we can start small. Tomorrow I'll go into town, see Sarah Henderson and the others, begin to reconnect." And Swift Arrow. "I stay here," the Lakota man said. "Help with land, show good intentions." Thomas laughed without humor. "You think chopping wood will make them forget your Lakota?" Swift Arrow met his gaze. "No, but the river not cut through stone in one day takes many drops of water, much patience." Later that night, after Swift Arrow had settled in the small lean-to outside, Thomas and Martha lay awake in their bed, the space between them seeming wider than the physical inches that separated them. "I missed you," Thomas said quietly. "Every day you were gone, I missed you." Martha turned toward him, her face half hidden in shadow. "I missed you too. But Thomas, I can't pretend I'm the same woman who rode out that day. What I experienced, what I learned, it's changed me." "So I've noticed," Thomas said. "The Martha I knew wouldn't have risked everything for some mystical vision." "Perhaps you never fully knew me," she replied. "Or perhaps I never fully knew myself until now." Thomas stared at the ceiling. "Do you love him?" Martha propped herself up on one elbow. "Not in the way you're asking. I respect him. I've learned from him. And yes, I care what happens to him. But it's you I came back to, Thomas. But not just me, he pointed out. You brought him with you, into our home, our life, because it's necessary, because his path is bound with ours now. She reached out to touch his face. I'm asking you to trust me, Thomas, to believe that what I'm doing, what we could do together, matters more than what the town thinks of us. Thomas caught her hand. And if I can't accept this mission of yours? In the moonlight filtering through the window, he saw pain flash across her face. Then I'll have failed before I've begun, because without you, Thomas, I can't build the bridge I've seen in my vision. It takes all three of us. The next morning, Martha rode into Clearwater alone. Thomas watched her go with a mixture of worry and resentment, then turned to find Swift Arrow splitting logs behind the cabin. You don't need to do that, Thomas said gruffly. Swift Arrow set another log on the stump. I help where I can. Your woman returns to face difficult people. Least I can do is make myself useful here. Thomas leaned against the cabin wall. Why did you really come back with her? You must have known the danger. Swift Arrow brought the axe down cleanly, splitting the log in one stroke. Some paths chosen for us, some we choose ourselves. This path I choose, because of the vision. Vision is important, yes, but also... Swift Arrow selected another log. Your wife is the first white person to truly see my people, not as savages, not as curiosities, as people with wisdom to share. Thomas considered this. And what do you hope will come of this, realistically? Swift Arrow paused, axe resting on his shoulder. Small seed first. Understanding between a few people. Then maybe more seeds grow, no more killing over land that Spirit gave to all. That's a beautiful thought, Thomas admitted. But people like the Reed brothers, like Frank Donnelly, they'll never accept it. Perhaps not, Swift Arrow agreed. But their children might, or their children's children. The sincerity in the man's voice gave Thomas pause. Despite himself, he was beginning to see why Martha had been drawn to Swift Arrow's perspective. How do we even begin? Thomas asked, more to himself than to the Lakota. Swift Arrow smiled slightly. You just did. You asked, we, first step on new path. Before Thomas could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Swift Arrow tensed, but Thomas motioned for him to stay calm as he walked around to the front of the cabin. Sarah Henderson and her husband Richard were dismounting, along with Pastor Mitchell and his wife Rebecca. Thomas felt a surge of relief at the sight of friendly faces. Thomas, Sarah called, hurrying forward to embrace him. We just saw Martha in town. I can hardly believe she's alive. Pastor Mitchell clasped Thomas's hand warmly. A true miracle, Thomas. God has answered our prayers. Where is she? Thomas asked, looking past them toward the road. Richard Henderson's expression grew serious. She's still in town. There was a situation at the general store. Ethan Burke refused to serve her. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. Because of Swift Arrow. Rebecca Mitchell nodded sadly. Word has spread about her Lakota friend, and about her claim regarding her grandmother. Is it true, Thomas? Sarah asked gently. Was Martha's grandmother really a Lakota woman? Thomas hesitated. Martha believes it is. She has her grandmother's journal with Lakota symbols, and Swift Arrow's people recognized... Swift Arrow, Pastor Mitchell interrupted. Is he here now? Before Thomas could answer, Swift Arrow appeared around the corner of the cabin, still holding the axe. The visitors stepped back instinctively. I am here, Swift Arrow said, setting the axe down carefully. No need for fear. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group until Rebecca Mitchell, always the diplomat, stepped forward with her hand extended. I'm Rebecca Mitchell. My husband is the pastor here in Clearwater. Swift Arrow looked surprised, but accepted the handshake. I am called Swift Arrow. Thank you for visiting Thomas's home. We came to see Martha, actually. Sarah explained, her voice uncertain, "and to understand what's happening." "What's happening," came Martha's voice as she rode up to the cabin, "is that people are choosing fear over understanding." She dismounted, her expression grim. "Ethan Burke just told me I'm no longer welcome in his store unless I come to my senses and send the savage back where he belongs." Sarah winced. "Martha, you must understand. It's not that people aren't grateful you're alive, but they'd prefer I came back alone," Martha finished. "Or better yet, not at all if it means challenging their views." Pastor Mitchell stepped forward. "Martha, perhaps if we could speak privately, I'm sure there are aspects of your experience that you might want spiritual counsel on." Martha's eyes flashed. "Are you suggesting I need to confess something, Pastor?" No, he backpedaled. "Only that such an ordeal might leave anyone questioning their path." "I've never been more certain of my path," Martha replied. "What I question is why a community that claims to follow Christ's teachings of love can't extend that love to someone different from themselves." Rebecca placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm. "Perhaps we might all sit down together, break bread, as it were. Isn't that what Christ would do?" Thomas looked at his wife in surprise. In Rebecca Mitchell, it seemed Martha had found an unexpected ally. "I'd be honored to share a meal," Swift Arrow said carefully. "In my culture, eating together builds trust between strangers." Richard Henderson, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. "I lost cousins at Little Bighorn," he said bluntly. "I'm not sure I can sit at a table with a man who had nothing to do with that battle," Martha challenged. "Swift Arrow's band has maintained peace with settlers. He risked his life to save mine." Sarah touched her husband's arm. "Richard, please, for Martha's sake." After a long moment, Richard nodded stiffly. "For Martha." As they moved toward the cabin, Thomas caught Martha's eye. She offered him a small, hopeful smile that reminded him of the woman he'd fallen in love with, determined, principled, unafraid to stand for what she believed. Despite his misgivings, he found himself returning her smile. That evening, as an unlikely group gathered around the Blackwoods table, something remarkable began to take shape. It wasn't accepted, not yet, but as Swift Arrow shared stories of his people's traditions, as Martha translated concepts between two languages, as Rebecca Mitchell asked thoughtful questions instead of making judgments, a tiny seed was planted. Thomas, watching his wife's animated face as she explained Lakota concepts of stewardship over the land, realized that perhaps her vision wasn't as far-fetched as he'd initially thought. Perhaps change could begin here, in this small cabin, around this simple table. But outside, beyond the warm circle of candlelight, the darkness was gathering. In town, voices raised in anger demanded action against the Indian lover and her savage companion. Frank Donnelly and the Reed brothers drank and plotted. Sheriff Miller worried about how to maintain peace in a community divided. And miles away on the open prairie, riders from Swift Arrow's band journeyed toward Clearwater, concerned about their brother's prolonged absence, unaware they were heading toward a confrontation that would test Martha's vision of harmony to its very limits. The storm that had reunited Thomas and Martha had passed, but the true tempest was only beginning to form on the horizon. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Dakota territory. Martha stood on the porch of the cabin, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill, watching the first golden rays illuminate the distant hills. Behind her, Thomas and Swift Arrow shared a quiet breakfast, an uneasy truce having formed between the two men after the previous night's dinner with the Mitchells and Hendersons. Something on the horizon caught Martha's attention, a plume of dust rising from the prairie. Riders were approaching, at least 4 by her count, moving with purpose toward Clearwater. She shielded her eyes against the brightening sun, her heart quickening as she recognized the distinctive silhouettes. "Swift Arrow," she called urgently. "Your people are coming." Both men joined her on the porch. Swift Arrow's expression shifted from surprise to concern as he counted the approaching riders. "Grey Wolf leads them," he said. "My brother, come search for me." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "This complicates things. The town is already on edge. I must meet them before they reach settlement," Swift Arrow said, already moving toward his horse. "Explain the situation." "I'm coming with you," Martha said firmly. "They know me. They'll listen." Thomas hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I'll come too. Better they meet all three of us together." They rode out to intercept the Lakota riders a mile from the Blackwood homestead. As they approached, Martha recognized Grey Wolf at the lead, his face painted with red ochre stripes. Beside him rode Sky Dancer, Swift Arrow's sister, and two warriors whose names Martha had learned during her time with the tribe, Running Elk and Stone Heart. The groups stopped 20 paces apart. Grey Wolf raised his hand in greeting, speaking rapidly in Lakota to Swift Arrow. "He asks if I am a prisoner," Swift Arrow translated for Thomas. "Wants to know why I not returned to village." Martha urged her horse forward, addressing Grey Wolf directly and halting Lakota. The warrior's eyes widened in surprise at hearing his language from a white woman's lips. "She tells them I come by choice," Swift Arrow explained to Thomas, "that we follow the vision of peace between our peoples." Grey Wolf's response was swift and heated. Martha caught only fragments. Bluecoats gathering. Broken promises. More settlers coming. Swift Arrow's face grew grave as he listened. "Army moves against our hunting grounds," he told Thomas, "breaking the treaty again. Chief sends warning, my people prepare for possible conflict." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Ask him how soon." After a brief exchange, Swift Arrow turned to Thomas. "Moon cycle, maybe less. Chiefs gather to decide response." Martha moved her horse between the two groups. "Tell them about our vision, Swift Arrow. Tell them what we're trying to build here." Swift Arrow spoke at length in Lakota, his voice rising and falling with emphasis. Grey Wolf interrupted several times, his tone skeptical. Sky Dancer remained silent, her dark eyes moving between Martha and Thomas with undisguised curiosity. "My brother says vision is good, but cannot fill empty stomachs," Swift Arrow finally translated. "Says settlers want only land, care nothing for understanding." "That's not true of everyone," Thomas interjected. "Tell him about the Mitchells, about how they sat at our table last night." When Swift Arrow relayed this, Sky Dancer spoke for the first time, asking a question that made Swift Arrow smile slightly. "My sister asks if White Pastor's woman really shared a pipe with a Lakota warrior." Rebecca took only a symbolic puff. Martha clarified with a small smile of her own. "But yes, she did." This detail seemed to interest Grey Wolf. He exchanged glances with his companions before speaking again, his tone less confrontational. "He says small seeds of peace are good, but cannot stop armies' rifles," Swift Arrow translated. "Asks what we really hope to achieve." Martha straightened in her saddle. "Tell him we hope to create understanding between our peoples here in Clearwater. A small example that might spread. And ask if their chiefs would meet with our town leaders. Neutral ground, peaceful talk." Grey Wolf barked a laugh when this was translated. "Memories are too long, wounds too fresh," Swift Arrow relayed. "Says too many betrayals." "Then tell him we need to start making new memories," Thomas said suddenly. "Tell him I, a settler, a white man, am willing to listen, to learn. If I can change, others can too." As Swift Arrow translated, Grey Wolf studied Thomas with new interest. After a long moment, he spoke again, his voice measured. "My brother says he will take our words to the council," Swift Arrow said, "but makes no promises. Says I should return to the village, that my place is with my people in dangerous times." Martha felt a stab of dismay. "And what did you tell him?" Swift Arrow met her eyes. "That is my place now on the path between worlds. That I stay. Grey Wolf's expression hardened at his brother's response. He spoke sharply, gesturing toward Clearwater. "He says, 'The town will never accept me,'" Swift Arrow translated. "Says Martha's vision leads to death, not peace." Before Martha could respond, shouts erupted from behind them. Turning, they saw Frank Donnelly, the Reed brothers, and 4 other men from Clearwater riding hard toward them, rifles raised. "Injuns!" Isaiah Reed called. "Just as we thought, they're planning an attack." "No!" Martha cried, wheeling her horse around. "This is a peaceful meeting." Grey Wolf and his warriors immediately readied their bows. Stoneheart nocked an arrow, aiming at the approaching settlers. "Stop!" Thomas yelled, positioning himself between the 2 groups. "Lower your weapons, all of you!" Frank Donnelly reined in his horse, raising his rifle. "Out of the way, Blackwood. These savages are on settler land." "This is my land," Thomas countered firmly, "and they're here at my invitation." Isaiah Reed spat. "Your invitation. You're harboring hostiles now." Swift Arrow moved his horse beside Thomas's. "We come in peace. No weapons raised until you come charging." "Peace," Frank sneered. "Tell that to Custer's men," Grey Wolf growled. "Something in Lakota," Swift Arrow replied sharply, raising his hand to keep his brother's warriors from acting. "Everyone calm down," Martha pleaded, moving forward. "These are Swift Arrow's family. They came looking for him, nothing more." Ezekiel Reed, the younger brother, kept his rifle trained on the Lakota. "Why would they come looking unless they're planning something? Sheriff needs to know about this." "Sheriff already knows Swift Arrow is here," Thomas said evenly. "There's nothing illegal happening. Now lower your weapons before someone does something foolish." Frank Donnelly's finger hovered near his trigger. "The law says any Injun off the reservation is fair game. The law says no such thing," came a new voice. Sheriff Miller rode up, accompanied by Pastor Mitchell. "Stand down, Frank, all of you." The arrival of the sheriff shifted the tension slightly. The settlers lowered their rifles, though they kept them ready. Grey Wolf spoke urgently to Swift Arrow. "My brother says they will go," Swift Arrow translated, "but warns that armed men following them would be unwise." Sheriff Miller nodded. "No one's following anyone. Frank, you and the others head back to town. Now." "You're letting them ride free?" Frank protested. "After Little Bighorn?" "These people had nothing to do with Little Bighorn," Pastor Mitchell intervened, "and threatening peaceful visitors makes us no better than the worst among their kind." The Reverend's words caused both sides to reflect. Reluctantly, Frank and his companions wheeled their horses around, though not without muttered threats. "This isn't over," Isaiah Reed warned as they departed. When they were gone, Sheriff Miller turned to Thomas. "I can keep them in line today, but I can't promise tomorrow. Things are heating up in Clearwater." Grey Wolf spoke again to Swift Arrow, his expression grave. After a brief exchange, Swift Arrow nodded. "My brother leaves now," he told Thomas. "And Martha will take our words to council, but says time grows short for peaceful solutions." Martha approached Grey Wolf's horse. "Tell him we're grateful he came in peace, that we hope to meet again under better circumstances." After Swift Arrow translated, Grey Wolf considered Martha for a long moment before reaching into a pouch at his waist. He withdrew a small carved stone bear and extended it to her. "Protection," he said in halting English. "Strong spirit needs strong protection." Martha accepted the gift with appropriate reverence. "Thank you, Grey Wolf." With a final exchange of words with his brother, Grey Wolf led his small band away across the prairie. They watched until the riders were distant specks on the horizon. "That could have ended badly," Sheriff Miller observed. Pastor Mitchell nodded solemnly. "A portent of what's to come, I fear, if cooler heads don't prevail." He turned to Thomas. "The town council is meeting tonight. I think you, Martha, and your guest should attend." "To what end?" Thomas asked. "You saw how Frank and the Reeds reacted. Most of the council shares their views." "Not all," Pastor Mitchell replied. Rebecca has been speaking with the women of the congregation. Sarah, Henderson too. Seeds are being planted, Thomas. Martha touched her husband's arm. This is how it begins. Small steps. Sheriff Miller adjusted his hat. I'll guarantee your safety at the meeting. Can't promise a warm welcome, but no one will raise a hand against you while I'm present. After the sheriff and pastor departed, Thomas, Martha, and Swift Arrow returned to the cabin. The morning's events had cast a shadow over their tentative hopes. Grey Wolf speaks truth, Swift Arrow said as they unsaddled the horses. Army moves against my people again. Treaty words empty, like winter trees. All the more reason to try building understanding here, Martha insisted. If Clearwater can set an example— Martha, Thomas interrupted gently. I believe in what you're trying to do. I'm beginning to, anyway. But we have to be realistic. A few friendly conversations won't stop the momentum of history. Martha's eyes flashed. History isn't some unstoppable force, Thomas. It's made by people who choose fear or understanding, violence or peace. And what if they choose fear? Thomas asked. What then? Swift Arrow leaned against the corral. Ye fence. Then we stand together. 3 paths, 1 direction. Thomas studied the Lakota man who had saved his wife's life, who had taught her about her hidden heritage, who now risked everything for a vision of peace. Despite his initial jealousy and suspicion, Thomas was beginning to respect Swift Arrow's courage. Together then, he agreed, at the council meeting tonight. That evening, the small Clearwater meeting hall was packed to capacity. Every resident old enough to attend had come, drawn by curiosity and concern. Thomas, Martha, and Swift Arrow entered to a wave of whispers and stares. Some turned away pointedly, others watched with undisguised hostility. A few, Rebecca Mitchell among them, offered tentative smiles of welcome. William Fletcher, as head of the town council, called the meeting to order. We face an unprecedented situation, he began. For the first time in Clearwater's history, we have a Lakota individual among us, not as a prisoner but as guest. His discomfort with the situation was evident in his shifting posture. Frank Donnelly stood immediately. Guest! He's an infiltrator, and the Blackwoods are harboring him while his people prepare to attack. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. That's a lie, Martha called out, rising to her feet. Swift Arrow's people came in peace this morning. It was settlers who raised weapons first. Because they were on our land, Ezekiel Reed shouted. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. They were on Blackwood land, by invitation. No law was broken. William Fletcher raised his hands for quiet. The question before us isn't about legality. It's about safety. Many here fear that having a Lakota among us puts Clearwater at risk. From whom? Martha challenged. From the army, who might suspect us of sympathizing with the Lakota? Or from the Lakota themselves, who might see us as no different from those who've broken treaties and stolen their hunting grounds? A hush fell over the room at her direct words. Pastor Mitchell seized the opening. Friends, neighbors, what if we've been given an opportunity here? An opportunity to demonstrate that not all settlers seek conflict with the native peoples. Rebecca Mitchell stood beside her husband. I have broken bread with Swift Arrow. I have heard his stories, learned of his customs. There is wisdom there, and humanity is no different from our own. Easy for you to say, Jacob Walsh countered. Your family wasn't butchered by his kind. Swift Arrow, who had remained silent until now, stood slowly. The room tensed, many hands moving instinctively toward weapons. I speak for myself only, he said in careful English. Not all my people, just as Thomas did not speak for all settlers. He scanned the hostile faces before him. Both sides know grief. Both sides buried loved ones. Question is, how many more graves do we dig before trying a different path? His simple eloquence caught many off guard. Even William Fletcher seemed to consider his words. Martha rose to stand beside Swift Arrow. "I've lived among the Lakota. I've seen their humanity, their family bonds, their spiritual depth, and I've discovered that my own grandmother was Lakota, taken from her people, renamed, forced to forget her heritage." Gasps and murmurs met this revelation. For many in Clearwater, it was the first time hearing Martha's claim. "That's why you defend them," someone called out. "Blood loyalty?" "I defend understanding between peoples because it's right," Martha replied. "Because the alternative is endless bloodshed." Thomas joined his wife and Swift Arrow. "I was skeptical. At first," he admitted to the assembly. "Angry even, but I've had my eyes opened. We have a chance here to do something different, something better than continuing a cycle of vengeance." Frank Donnelly pushed through the crowd. "Pretty words don't change hard facts. The army's moving against the hostiles for good reason. Taking in one of them makes us targets for the hostiles who'll see us as traitors to him, and for the army who'll see us as sympathizers. We're not asking Clearwater to take sides in the larger conflict," Martha clarified. "Only to allow one man sanctuary while we work toward understanding." William Fletcher stroked his beard thoughtfully. "And what form would this understanding take?" "Trade," Swift Arrow suggested. "Fair trade between my people and yours. Medicine woman," he nodded toward Martha, "could teach healing ways. And from both worlds, I teach hunting skills, how to read the weather, find water in dry times." Sarah Henderson, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "The drought last summer nearly ruined us. If there are better ways to find water, I'd like to learn them." A few heads nodded in reluctant agreement. Even in their prejudice, the practical settlers couldn't dismiss potentially valuable knowledge. "And what do we get in return for this risk?" William Fletcher asked. "Peace with neighboring bands," Swift Arrow answered. "Safe passage, maybe warning, if other tribes plan trouble." The meeting erupted in debate. For every voice supporting the idea, 3 opposed it. The arguments grew heated, exposing the deep fault lines within the community. Finally, William Fletcher raised his hands for silence. "This decision affects all of Clearwater. We'll put it to a vote in 3 days' time. Until then, Swift Arrow may remain with the Blackwoods, provided he stays out of town." It wasn't the outcome Martha had hoped for, but it was better than immediate rejection. As the meeting dispersed, small groups formed, arguments continuing in hushed tones. Pastor Mitchell approached them. "A beginning," he said encouragingly. "Not all minds are closed." Rebecca squeezed Martha's hand. "I'll continue speaking with the women. They listen, even when their husbands won't admit it." As they left the meeting hall, Frank Donnelly blocked their path, flanked by the Reed brothers and Jacob Walsh. 3 days, Frank said, his voice low and threatening. "That's how long you have before this town votes to run you out. Or worse." He glared at Swift Arrow. "Your savage friend would be wise to disappear before then." "That sounded like a threat, Frank," Sheriff Miller said, appearing behind them. "Not wise to threaten folks under my protection." Frank backed away, but his parting words hung in the air. "Protection only lasts as long as the protector stands, Sheriff. Remember that." As they walked home under a canopy of stars, Thomas couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. 3 days isn't much time to change generations of prejudice. Martha linked her arm through his. "Then we'll use every hour wisely." Swift Arrow walked slightly ahead, his face turned toward the distant horizon where his people's lands lay. "Time is short," he agreed, "but spirit works in ways we cannot see. Seeds planted today grow tomorrow." Thomas wasn't sure if it was Martha's determination or Swift Arrow's quiet confidence that swayed him, but he found himself believing that perhaps change was possible. Small at first, like a trickle of water against stone, but persistent enough to eventually carve a new path. What none of them knew as they returned to the Blackwood homestead was that messengers were already riding to the Army Outpost 60, miles east with news of Indian sympathizers in Clearwater, and to the Lakota Council with Grey Wolf's report of a possible new alliance. The seeds of understanding Martha sought to plant were indeed taking root. But whether they would grow into peace or be washed away in blood remained to be seen. For in the territory's unforgiving landscape, both hope and hatred were gaining strength, racing toward an inevitable confrontation. And as Swift Arrow had said, time was growing short. The first day after the town meeting dawned with an urgency that hung in the air like the scent of coming rain. Martha was already awake when the first light crept through the cabin windows, her grandmother's journal open in her lap as she studied the symbols by lamplight. Swift Arrow sat cross-legged nearby, patiently explaining the meanings behind the intricate pictographs. This one, he said, pointing to a spiral symbol, means journey of spirit. Not just travel from one place to another, but the growth of soul. Thomas watched them from the doorway, coffee mug in hand. The easy way they communicated, finishing each other's thoughts, sharing knowing glances, no longer stirred jealousy in him, but something closer to wonder. In the 3 days since accepting Swift Arrow into their home, Thomas had witnessed a side of Martha he'd never fully seen before, confident, purposeful, connected to something larger than their homestead life. "We need a plan," Thomas said, joining them at the table. 3 days to change minds set against us. Where do we start? Martha closed the journal carefully. People fear what they don't understand. We need to help them understand. Not everyone will listen, Swift Arrow noted. Some minds like stone, hard, unchanging. Then we focus on those who might, Martha replied. Sarah Henderson already shows interest in Lakota healing ways. Rebecca Mitchell is sympathetic to our cause. Even William Fletcher seemed willing to consider the benefits of knowledge exchange. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. We need to give them something tangible, not just talk of peace, but a demonstration of what we can gain through cooperation. Swift Arrow's eyes lit with an idea. Drought is coming again this summer. I can show ways to find water, save crops, knowledge my people use for generations. Perfect, Martha agreed. We'll invite William Fletcher and Richard Henderson to see these techniques firsthand. If we can convince them that Swift Arrow's knowledge has practical value, a frantic knocking at the door interrupted their planning. Thomas opened it to find Sarah Henderson, her face pale with distress. Thomas, thank God you're home. It's Emma. Her fever's returned worse than before. Richard sent me to fetch Martha. Martha was already gathering her medical supplies. What are her symptoms? Burning fever, rash across her chest, struggling to breathe, Sarah replied, wringing her hands. The doctor from Fort Harrison won't arrive until tomorrow at the earliest. Martha hesitated, glancing at the herbal preparations on her shelf. Sarah, I may need to use remedies I learned from Swift Arrow's people. They're effective but different from what you're used to. Sarah looked briefly at Swift Arrow, fear and desperation warring in her expression. I don't care where the medicine comes from if it saves my daughter. Swift Arrow rose. I come too. No plants to break fever spirit. Sarah's eyes widened. Richard won't. Tell Richard I insisted on bringing him, Thomas interrupted, that I wouldn't let Martha go without protection. Though clearly uncomfortable, Sarah nodded. Within minutes they were riding toward the Henderson homestead. As they approached, Richard emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand, when he spotted Swift Arrow. What is he doing here? He demanded, blocking the doorway. He knows medicines that might help Emma, Martha explained, dismounting quickly. Please, Richard, your daughter needs every advantage now. Richard's jaw worked as he struggled with the decision. Inside the cabin, a child's wheezing cough could be heard. Fine, he said grimly, stepping aside, but I'll be watching his every move. Inside, 10-year-old Emma lay on a small bed, her face flushed with fever, breathing labored. Martha immediately knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on the girl's forehead. She burns like fire, Martha murmured. "Sarah, fetch cool water and cloths." Swift Arrow hung back, respecting the family's space, while observing the child carefully. When Martha beckoned him closer, he approached slowly, hands visible to reassure Richard. "Lung sickness," Swift Arrow said quietly to Martha. "Need white pine bark tea, elderberry and rabbit tobacco. Have in medicine pouch." "You brought these." "It plants with you?" Martha asked. Swift Arrow nodded. "Always carry healing plants. Way of medicine person." Richard watched suspiciously as Swift Arrow handed small pouches of dried plants to Martha. "How do I know these won't poison my child?" "Because I will drink first," Martha said firmly, preparing the remedies. "As will Swift Arrow. We would never harm Emma." As Martha brewed the herbal mixture, Swift Arrow spoke softly in Lakota, a rhythmic chant that made Richard tense. "What's he saying?" he demanded. "A healing prayer," Martha translated, asking the plants to release their medicine spirits to help Emma. Richard might have protested further, but Emma's worsening cough silenced him. When the tea was ready, Martha and Swift Arrow each took a sip to demonstrate its safety before helping Emma drink small amounts. For the next several hours, they worked together, tending to the sick child. Swift Arrow showed Martha how to create a steam tent using pine needles that helped ease Emma's breathing. By late afternoon, the girl's fever had begun to break, and her breathing grew less labored. Sarah, exhausted but relieved, touched Swift Arrow's arm hesitantly. "Thank you," she whispered. Richard stood in the corner, his expression complicated. When Swift Arrow stepped outside to gather more fresh pine needles, Richard followed him. "My daughter seems to be improving," he said. Stiffly, Swift Arrow nodded. "Strong spirit fights inside her. Medicine helps, but her own strength is most important." Richard studied the Lakota man's face. "You've done this before. Helped children like Emma." "Many times. Sickness comes to all people, Lakota, white, all the same when fever burns." A long silence stretched between them before Richard spoke again. "I lost cousins at Little Bighorn." Swift Arrow met his gaze steadily. "I lost my brother in the Washita massacre, Black Kettle's camp. Women, children killed while sleeping." The shared recounting of losses hung in the air, not as accusations, but as acknowledgments of a painful history that connected them. "Why help us?" Richard finally asked. "After everything that's happened between our peoples?" Swift Arrow looked toward the horizon where both their territories met. "Because the path of vengeance leads nowhere good. Blood calls for blood until no one is left standing." He gathered more pine needles carefully. "Time to try a different way." By evening, Emma was sitting up, weak but alert, the dangerous fever broken. As Martha prepared to leave, Sarah pressed her hand warmly. "Come back tomorrow?" she asked. "Bring more of that tea?" Martha smiled. "Of course. And Sarah, thank you for trusting us." As they rode home in the gathering dusk, Thomas felt a cautious, hope-stirring. "One family," he mused. "It's a small step, but perhaps it's a beginning." "Every river begins as a small stream," Swift Arrow replied. The second day brought unexpected visitors to the Blackwood homestead. Rebecca Mitchell arrived with 3 other women from Clearwater, Dorothy Walsh, Eleanor Burke, and Widow Harrison, whose husband had been one of Clearwater's founders. "We've come to learn," Rebecca announced simply, holding up a basket. "I've brought bread to share. The others have brought their questions." Martha welcomed them inside, hiding her surprise. These women were not just any townspeople. They were wives of some of Clearwater's most influential men, including Jacob Walsh and Ethan Burke, who had been openly hostile to Swift Arrow's presence. Thomas excused himself to work the fields, recognizing that the women might speak more freely without him present. Swift Arrow offered to leave as well, but Eleanor Burke, Ethan's wife, stopped him. "My husband wouldn't approve of this visit," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. but our youngest son has a persistent cough that no remedy has touched. If what Sarah Henderson says about Emma is true, Swift Arrow nodded, understanding. Many plants help cough, can show you which ones, how to prepare. For the next several hours, the cabin became an unexpected classroom. Martha showed the women her grandmother's journal, explaining how the knowledge had passed down through generations. Swift Arrow demonstrated how to identify, harvest, and prepare medicinal plants that grew abundantly around Clearwater, but whose properties the settlers had never known. Widow Harrison, whose arthritis-gnarled hands had brought her constant pain, was particularly interested in a salve Swift Arrow prepared. "My mother would have given anything for this knowledge," she remarked, as the warming sensation brought immediate relief to her joints. "Such a waste that our peoples have fought instead of shared wisdom all these years." By mid-afternoon, the atmosphere had transformed from cautious curiosity to genuine engagement. Dorothy Walsh, initially the most reserved, finally voiced the question that underlay the visit. "Is it true what they say, that you lived among his people for 3 months, Martha, that you became one of them?" Martha set down the herbs she was bundling. "I lived with them, yes, I learned their ways, but I didn't become one of them. I discovered I already was, in part. My grandmother's blood flows in my veins. I simply reconnected with a heritage that was always mine. And they accepted you, just like that?" Eleanor asked incredulously. Swift Arrow answered before Martha could. "Not all. Some distrusted. But wise ones saw truth. All people connected. Underneath differences, like trees in forest, different kinds, but roots touch beneath ground." The poetry of his explanation resonated with the women in a way that political arguments never could. When they finally departed, each carried small bundles of medicinal herbs and promises to return. "They'll talk to their husbands," Rebecca said, confidently as she prepared to leave. "Women have ways of changing minds that town meetings never achieve." That evening, as they ate supper, Thomas recounted a surprising encounter with William Fletcher, who had ridden out to the fields to speak with him privately. "He says there's talk of a military patrol coming through Clearwater soon," Thomas reported, grimly. "Looking for Indian sympathizers and gathering intelligence on Lakota movements." Martha set down her fork. "Who would have sent for them?" "Frank Donnelly, most likely," Thomas replied. "He served with them, still has connections." Swift Arrow's expression remained calm, but his eyes revealed concern. "When do they come?" Fletcher wasn't sure. Could be days, could be after the vote. But their arrival would change everything. Martha pushed her plate away, appetite gone. "Then we have even less time than we thought." The third day, the day of the vote, broke with ominous storm clouds gathering on the western horizon. The air felt heavy, with more than just approaching rain. Tension seemed to permeate the very soil of Clearwater. Word had spread about Emma Henderson's miraculous recovery. Overnight, it seemed the town had divided more sharply than before. Those who saw potential benefit in Swift Arrow's knowledge, and those who viewed any collaboration with the Lakota as dangerous betrayal. Thomas, Martha, and Swift Arrow arrived at the meeting hall as the first fat raindrops began to fall. The building was already packed, the crowd parting reluctantly to let them through. Thomas noted with concern that many men wore sidearms openly, something rarely done at community gatherings. William Fletcher called the meeting to order his face grave. "Citizens of Clearwater, we gather to vote on a matter unprecedented in our settlement's history, whether to permit the continued presence of a Lakota individual among us, and by extension, whether to pursue the path of exchange and understanding proposed by the Blackwoods." Frank Donnelly immediately stood. "Before we waste time voting, the people should know that a military patrol is already en route to Clearwater. Captain James Wilson himself leads them." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Captain Wilson's reputation for harsh treatment of Indian sympathizers was well known. "All the more reason to vote now, while we still can," Pastor Mitchell countered. to show that Clearwater makes its own decisions, not the military. The debate that followed was heated. Richard Henderson, to everyone's surprise, spoke in favor of Swift Arrow's presence, recounting Emma's recovery. Several women whose husbands had been staunchly opposed now voiced tentative support for Martha's vision of knowledge exchange. But opposition remained fierce. Jacob Walsh pointed out that the Lakota Council still gathered to decide on a response to army movements that threatened their hunting grounds. "How do we know this isn't just a ploy to gain our trust before an attack?" he demanded. Throughout the arguments, Swift Arrow remained silent, his dignity in the face of accusation making a stronger impression on some than any words could have. Finally, William Fletcher called for the vote. Those in favor of permitting Swift Arrow to remain in Clearwater under the Blackwood's supervision and of pursuing limited exchange of knowledge with his people, raise your hands. Hands lifted throughout the room, not a majority, but more than Thomas had dared hope for. Martha squeezed his hand tightly as they counted. Those opposed. Another show of hands, including Frank Donnelly, the Reed brothers, and Jacob Walsh, among others. William Fletcher surveyed the room carefully. "By my count, the vote stands at 26 in favor, 29 opposed." Martha's hopes fell. They had come so close. "However," Fletcher continued unexpectedly, "as head of this council, I exercise my right to cast a deciding vote in cases where the community is so closely divided." The room held its breath. Fletcher's gaze moved from Frank Donnelly's threatening glare to Swift Arrow's dignified stillness, then to Martha's pleading eyes. "My vote is for allowing this experiment in understanding to proceed with conditions and close supervision. The Council will review the situation again in 1 month's time." Shouts erupted. Celebration from supporters, angry protests from opponents. Above the din, the meeting hall door burst open. Sheriff Miller stood there, rain dripping from his hat, his expression urgent. "Riders approaching from the east," he announced. "Army patrol under Captain Wilson. And from the west," he paused, swallowing hard, "a band of Lakota warriors led by a man called Grey Wolf." The meeting erupted into chaos. Frank Donnelly and his supporters rushed for their weapons. Women gathered children close. Fletcher called desperately for order. In the confusion, Swift Arrow caught Martha's arm. "My brother comes with a peace delegation," he explained rapidly. "Grey Wolf convinced the council to send speakers, not warriors." "But they're armed?" Thomas asked. "For protection only. Would not come defenseless." Martha's mind raced. The timing couldn't be worse. If they encounter the army patrol, bloodshed, Swift Arrow finished grimly. Thomas made a swift decision. "We need to intercept them, both groups, keep them apart. Until we can explain." "Split up," Martha suggested. "Swift Arrow, you meet your brother and the delegation, explain about the vote, ask them to wait outside town." "Too dangerous for him alone," Thomas argued. "I'll go with him," Richard Henderson volunteered unexpectedly, stepping forward. "They saved my daughter. I owe them that much." Martha turned to Thomas. "We'll ride to meet Captain Wilson. Try to delay him. Explain the situation." Sheriff Miller joined them. "I'll come with you. The captain might listen to another lawman." Outside, the storm had intensified, sheets of rain reducing visibility to mere yards. Their small group separated at the edge of town, Swift Arrow and Richard Henderson riding west, while Martha, Thomas, and Sheriff Miller headed east. The driving rain masked the sound of approaching hoofbeats until the military patrol was almost upon them. Captain Wilson, a hard-faced man with a cavalry mustache, reined in sharply at the sight of riders approaching. "Identify yourselves," he called over the storm. "Sheriff Daniel Miller of Clearwater," the sheriff replied, moving forward with hands visible. "With Thomas and Martha Blackwood, settlers." Captain Wilson relaxed slightly at the white faces, though his men kept rifles ready. "Sheriff, we received intelligence about Indian activity near your settlement. possibly hostile. "No hostiles, Captain," Thomas said quickly. "Just a peaceful delegation coming to talk trade." The captain's expression darkened. "Trade? With hostiles? Who authorized this?" "Our town council just voted to permit limited exchange," Martha explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "Knowledge that benefits both sides. Medicine, water, finding survival skills. Voted to collaborate with savages, you mean?" the captain said coldly. "I had reports there might be sympathizers here, but didn't expect official sanction," Sheriff Miller intervened. "Captain, these are good people trying to prevent bloodshed. The delegation is small, peaceful. There's no threat to Clearwater. No." "Threat?" Captain Wilson scoffed. "Every Lakota allowed to roam free is a threat. Did you learn nothing from Little Bighorn?" Martha faced him directly, rain plastering her hair to her face. "What I've learned, Captain, is that treating all Lakota as enemies guarantees they'll become enemies. We're trying a different approach." The captain studied her with narrowed eyes. "You're the woman they spoke of, the one who lived among them and returned with a brave." His tone made the words an accusation. "I returned with knowledge," Martha corrected. "Knowledge that's already saved a child's life in our settlement." Before the captain could respond, a rider approached from the direction of Clearwater. Ezekiel Reed, his face twisted with malice. "Captain, Indians attacking from the west. They've already entered town." Martha's heart sank. "That's not possible. The delegation wouldn't—" "Quiet!" Captain Wilson barked, then turned to his lieutenant. "Prepare to engage. Full tactical approach." "Captain, please," Thomas pleaded. "Let us go ahead. Make sure this isn't a misunderstanding." "The time for talk is over, Blackwood," the captain replied, drawing his sidearm. "Now we'll see what your peaceful delegation really wants." As the patrol spurred toward Clearwater, Martha exchanged a desperate glance with Thomas. The vision of harmony she'd carried since her time with Swift Arrow's people teetered on the edge of destruction. The storm that had once separated them now threatened to wash away all hope of reconciliation. Yet even as they raced back toward town, Martha remembered Swift Arrow's words. "Every river begins as a small stream." Perhaps their efforts weren't in vain, even if this particular attempt failed. Seeds had been planted in Richard Henderson, who now rode alongside a Lakota brave, in William Fletcher, who had cast his vote for understanding, in the women who had come to learn healing ways. Whatever happened in the next hours would not be the end of their story, but merely another bend in the river's course. And rivers, as Swift Arrow had taught her, eventually wear down even the hardest stone. As they approached Clearwater through the driving rain, the sounds of chaos reached them. Shouts, a single gunshot. Martha urged her horse faster, praying they weren't too late to prevent the vision of peace from drowning in the storm of history's making. Clearwater emerged from the curtain of rain like a distorted painting, figures moving in confusion, voices raised against the storm. As Martha, Thomas, and Sheriff Miller rode into town, they found not the bloodbath Ezekiel Reed had described, but a tense standoff. In the center of the muddy street stood Grey Wolf and 3 other Lakota men, their hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. Facing them were Frank Donnelly, the Reed brothers, and several other armed settlers. Richard Henderson stood between the groups, his arms outstretched, as if physically holding them apart. Swift Arrow was speaking rapidly in Lakota to his brother, whose face was set in stone. "Hold your fire!" Sheriff Miller shouted, dismounting quickly. "Everyone stand down!" Thomas scanned the scene, noticing with relief that while weapons were drawn, none had been fired, save perhaps a warning shot. The single gunshot they'd heard had apparently not found a target. Captain Wilson and his patrol rode in behind them, rifles ready. The captain assessed the situation with narrow eyes, then barked orders to his men. "Encircle those hostiles. Any aggressive movement, you fire." "They're not hostiles," Martha protested, rushing forward. This is a peace delegation invited by our town council. Grey Wolf's eyes found Martha's across the chaotic scene. Recognition flickered in his gaze, followed by something like respect. He spoke a few words to Swift Arrow, who translated rapidly. My brother says he comes with words, not weapons. Brings message from Council of Elders. Frank Donnelly kept his rifle aimed squarely at Grey Wolf's chest. The message seems pretty clear to me. 4 armed braves riding into town during a storm. They were counting on catching us unprepared. We invited them, Frank. Richard Henderson countered. After the vote, William Fletcher sent word. Captain Wilson pushed his horse forward. You invited known hostiles onto American soil without military authorization? That borders on treason, Henderson. William Fletcher emerged from the gathering crowd, his expression resolute despite the rain streaming down his face. Captain, with all due respect, Clearwater made a lawful decision to engage in limited peaceful exchange with our Lakota neighbors. As head of the town council, I authorized this meeting. The captain's face darkened. Under whose authority? Under the authority of a free settlement governing its own affairs, Fletcher replied steadily. No law prohibits peaceful assembly or trade. The army might see things differently, the captain warned. Martha seized the moment of hesitation. She approached Grey Wolf slowly, hands visible, showing she carried no weapon. The Lakota warrior watched her with cautious eyes. Tell them why you've come, she said in halting Lakota. Let them hear your words. Grey Wolf glanced at the armed men surrounding them, then at Swift Arrow, who nodded encouragement. In careful, deliberate English, Grey Wolf addressed the gathered. Townspeople, I bring message from the Council of Chiefs. We hear of white settlement that votes for peace, not war. This unusual. A hint of wry humor touched his voice. Chiefs send us to see the truth with our own eyes, to speak of shared hunting grounds, trade of knowledge. The simplicity and dignity of his statement created a momentary silence, broken only by the sound of falling rain. Captain Wilson was unmoved. Pretty speech, but actions speak louder. The army has reports of Lakota warriors massing north of here, planning raids on settlements just like this one. Grey Wolf's expression hardened. Because the army breaks the treaty, moves into hunting grounds promised to my people. Starving families fight back, you would do the same. The captain dismounted, hand on his sidearm. I'm placing these men under military custody pending investigation. Sheriff, your cooperation would be appreciated but is not required. Sheriff. Miller positioned himself beside William Fletcher. Captain, I cannot allow you to detain peaceful visitors who came at our invitation. The standoff intensified. Martha could feel the weight of history pressing down. Countless similar confrontations that had ended in bloodshed. But something was different here. Richard Henderson, who had lost family to Lakota raids, now stood with Swift Arrow. William Fletcher, who had never shown particular sympathy for native peoples, now defended Grey Wolf's right to speak. Small changes, but significant. Thomas moved to Martha's side. We need to get everyone inside, out of this storm. Heated words lead to heated actions, and we're all cold and miserable out here. Martha nodded. She addressed Captain Wilson directly. Captain, we invite you and your men to join us in the meeting hall. Hear what Grey Wolf has to say, what our council has voted for. Judge with all facts before you, not just rumors and old hatreds. The captain's jaw worked as he considered. The rain continued to fall, soaking everyone equally, settler, soldier, and Lakota alike. Finally, he gave a curt nod. 1 hour, we'll hear them out. But my men keep their weapons, and those braves go in unarmed. Grey Wolf conferred briefly with his companions, then nodded agreement. One by one they removed their weapons, knives, a tomahawk, a rifle traded from settlers, and handed them to Swift Arrow. Inside the meeting hall, the two groups sat on opposite sides of the room, tension crackling between them like static before lightning. Martha, Thomas, Swift Arrow, and Sheriff Miller positioned themselves in the middle, a human bridge spanning the divide. William Fletcher called the impromptu meeting to order. We gather in extraordinary circumstances. By vote of this council, we have agreed to permit limited peaceful exchange with our Lakota neighbors. Captain Wilson and his men have concerns about this arrangement, and Grey Wolf brings a message from his council of chiefs. Let us hear each voice in turn. Grey Wolf spoke first, his dignity commanding attention despite his soaked appearance. Many winters' blood spills between our peoples. Many graves were dug. Now seeds of something different are planted here. He nodded toward Martha. Medicine. Woman returned from my people with new eyes, new understanding. Her husband, he gestured to Thomas, listens with open heart when it is easier to close it. He produced a small object wrapped in deerskin and placed it on the table. Chiefs, send this as symbol of possibility. He unwrapped it to reveal a pipe, beautifully carved from red stone. Sacred pipe offered only when words are true, promises binding as life itself. We propose peace between Clearwater and Black Elk's band. Shared hunting grounds to east. Trading of knowledge. Your metal work for our medicine ways, your farming, for our water finding. Captain Wilson leaned forward. And the reports of warriors massing north of here, what of those? Grey Wolf did not flinch from the direct question. Some bands prepare for war, yes. Army pushes, people push back. Hungry children make fathers desperate, but Black Elk's band chooses a different path, if Clearwater walks it with us. How do we know this isn't a ploy? Frank Donnelly demanded. Get us to lower our guard, then attack when we're vulnerable, Swift Arrow answered calmly. Same way we know you do not attack us when we sit here unarmed. Trust builds slowly, like a stone lodge, one rock at a time. Rebecca Mitchell, who had been listening intently, spoke up. The Bible tells us, blessed are the peacemakers. Are we not called to at least try the path of peace before resigning ourselves to endless conflict? Captain Wilson's expression remained skeptical. Mrs. Mitchell, the Army has seen too many broken peace treaties from both sides to put much faith in biblical platitudes. Then put faith in practical benefits, Richard Henderson suggested. My daughter lives because of their medical knowledge. What else might we gain through cooperation? Instead of conflict? The debate continued, voices rising and falling like the storm outside. Martha watched the faces around her, some softening, others remaining hard with suspicion. The divide wasn't as simple as settler versus Lakota anymore. New lines were being drawn between those who could imagine a different future and those bound by the wounds of the past. Finally, Captain Wilson rose. I've heard enough. As an officer of the United States Army, I cannot sanction unsupervised contact between settlers and Lakota peoples. However, he raised a hand to quiet the protests. I recognize the authority of this town council to govern its local affairs. He turned to William Fletcher. Under strict conditions, I'm prepared to report this as a localized peace initiative rather than treasonous collusion. Those conditions being all meetings between settlers and Lakota representatives take place in public, with the sheriff present. No weapons permitted, no exchange of ammunition or weapons technology, and monthly reports sent to Fort Harrison detailing all interactions. The conditions were stringent, but far more lenient than anyone had expected from the hard-faced captain. Martha caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, not softening exactly, but perhaps the faintest recognition that the endless cycle of violence served no one. And Grey Wolf's delegation? William Fletcher asked. Will you permit them to return? To their people unharmed? The captain glanced at the 4 Lakota men. They came in peace. They can leave in peace, after I've had a private word with them about the consequences of breaking faith with Clearwater or the United States government. Grey Wolf met the captain's gaze steadily. We understand the consequences. Question is, do you understand opportunity? For a moment, the two leaders, so different yet both responsible for the lives of their people, measured each other. Then the captain gave a curt nod of acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. As the meeting dispersed, the rain began to slacken. Thomas found Martha staring out the window at the breaking clouds. "It's not the complete acceptance you hoped for," he said gently, "but it's a beginning." Martha leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "It's more than I dared hope for, given how it nearly unraveled." "Thanks to Ezekiel Reed's false alarm about an attack." Martha's eyes narrowed. "That wasn't just a misunderstanding, was it? He deliberately tried to provoke bloodshed." Thomas nodded grimly. "Some will never accept change, Martha. The Reeds, Frank Donnelly, they've built their identity on hating. The Lakota, accepting peace would mean rethinking who they are. And yet Richard Henderson, who lost family, found his way to acceptance. Because of Emma, Thomas said simply. His daughter's life meant more to him than holding on to hatred. Swift Arrow approached, Grey Wolf at his side. The brothers stood. Before Martha and Thomas, a blend of wariness and hope in their expressions. "Captain wishes to speak with the delegation now," Swift Arrow explained, "but before that my brother has a message for you." Grey Wolf touched the small stone bear hanging at Martha's neck, the one he had given her days earlier. Bear spirit. Strong but not fight battles alone. Wolf spirit now joins. He produced a small carved wolf strung on a leather cord and offered it to Thomas. "For a husband who stands with a mate between two worlds." Thomas accepted the gift with appropriate gravity. "Thank you. I'll wear it honorably." Grey Wolf's weathered face creased slightly. "Hard days still come. Not all believe in the peace. Ipath, some of my people, some of yours, resist change, but seeds planted now will grow next season." With that, the brothers departed to meet with Captain Wilson. Martha and Thomas watched them go, aware that the path ahead remained uncertain, but no longer impossible to imagine. Outside, the storm had cleared, leaving the world washed clean. A rainbow arced across the eastern sky, a bridge of light spanning the divide between earth and heaven, a symbol that even nature's most violent tempests eventually give way to beauty. "What now?" Thomas asked, slipping his arm around Martha's waist. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Now we build on what began today. I teach Rebecca and the other women more of my grandmother's healing ways. You and Richard work with Swift Arrow on the water-finding techniques before the summer drought. Small steps, but important ones. And us." Thomas's voice held a question that went beyond their public mission. "What of our path, Martha?" She turned to face him fully. "Our path is clearer now than it's ever been, Thomas. When I was lost in that blizzard, I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was truly the beginning, not just for me, but for us, for what we could become together." Thomas touched her cheek gently. "I thought I'd lost you. Then I feared I'd lost who you were, that you'd become someone I couldn't recognize, couldn't understand. And now I see that you're still the Martha I fell in love with, brave, determined, compassionate, but you're more too. What you discovered about your grandmother, what you learned from Swift Arrow's people, it didn't change who you are. It completed you." His eyes held hers steadily. "And perhaps in time it might complete me too." Martha reached up to touch the wolf carving that now hung beside his mother's cross on his neck. "Three paths becoming one," she murmured. Just as the vision showed. As they walked back toward their homestead, Martha felt a deep certainty that transcended the day's fragile achievements. Whatever came next, whether perfect harmony or continued struggle, the secret she had brought back from her time with the Lakota had already changed everything. Not just for Clearwater, or for the relations between two peoples, but for her understanding of herself and her place in the world. She was Martha Blackwood, settler's wife and granddaughter of Morning Sky, with roots in two worlds that had been separate for too long. The storm that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her a new one, and through her perhaps offered a new beginning to others as well. Behind them, as shadows lengthened across the muddy street of Clearwater, Swift Arrow emerged from his meeting with Captain Wilson. His face was thoughtful as he gazed after Thomas and Martha, then up at the rainbow still visible in the eastern sky. His people had a name for such signs, hope bridges, they called them. Rare but powerful omens that appeared when new paths opened before those brave enough to walk them. He touched the medicine pouch at his waist, feeling the small items within, tokens from his ancestors, plants with healing powers, and now a folded paper Martha had given him, containing her careful drawing of her grandmother's symbols alongside English translations. Knowledge flowing two ways across the divide, as it was always meant to do. The path ahead would not be easy. Frank Donnelly and his allies would continue to resist. Some of Grey Wolf's people remained skeptical. Captain Wilson's tolerance extended, only so far, but something had shifted today, something small yet profound, like the first crack in a dam that eventually transforms into a new river channel. Swift Arrow turned his face toward the Blackwood homestead, where Thomas and Martha were now distant figures walking hand in hand, three paths becoming one, a vision taking root in reality, one small step at a time. And as the last light of day gilded the prairie grass around him, Swift Arrow began to walk toward the future they were building together. A future where storms might still come, but where no one would have to face them alone. 6 months passed since the stormy confrontation in Clearwater. Summer had blazed across the prairie, bringing the drought Swift Arrow had predicted. Fields would have withered without the water-finding techniques he taught the settlers. Locating underground springs, using signs invisible to untrained eyes, and building catchment systems based on Lakota designs that preserved precious rainwater. Autumn now painted the landscape in amber and gold. Martha stood on a small rise overlooking Clearwater, noting how the settlement had changed. A new structure stood at the edge of town, a round building with a distinctive peaked roof, neither fully settler nor fully Lakota in design. The trading post, they called it, though it served as much more, a meeting place, a classroom for knowledge exchange, a neutral ground where both peoples could gather without entering each other's territories. "Admiring your handiwork?" Thomas asked, joining her on the hillside. He looked different now, his beard trimmed in a style influenced by Lakota warriors, his clothing a practical blend of settler and native designs. The carved wolf still hung from his neck, alongside his mother's cross. Martha smiled, leaning against him. "Our handiwork. I couldn't have done any of this alone." "None of us could," came Swift Arrow's voice as he approached from the direction of the trading post. 3 paths, 1 direction. The phrase had become something of a motto among those who supported the peace initiative, a growing number that now included most of Clearwater's residents. Even Captain Wilson, who'd initially been so skeptical, had written favorably of the experiment in his reports to his superiors. "Grey Wolf returns tomorrow with the trading party," Swift Arrow informed them. "Brings winter medicine plants to exchange for metal tools." Thomas nodded. "Good timing. The first cold snap is coming. I can feel it in my joints." Martha glanced at her husband with fond amusement. "Now you sound like Widow Harrison." "Speaking of whom," Swift Arrow added, "her hands much improved with regular use of willow bark salve. Says she can knit again without pain." These small victories sustained them through the challenges that remained. Frank Donnelly and the Reed brothers had left Clearwater in disgust when the peace initiative gained popular support. "Rather live among real Americans than Indian lovers," Isaiah had declared as they departed for a settlement farther east. Their absence eased tensions significantly, though occasional incidents still tested the fragile peace. A young Lakota hunter had strayed too close to Henderson's cattle, causing momentary panic. A settler's dog had frightened a Lakota child gathering berries. Each time, the protocols established under the agreement had prevented escalation. Representatives from both Sides meeting to resolve misunderstandings before they could grow into conflict. Rebecca Mitchell asked when you'll continue the teaching circle, Thomas mentioned as they walked back toward town. The women are eager to learn more about winter remedies. Martha nodded. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm showing them how to prepare my grandmother's lung tonic before the winter coughs begin. The teaching circles had become a cornerstone of the exchange program. Martha taught settler women traditional Lakota medicine ways, while they shared their knowledge of textile crafts, food preservation, and European herbalism. Swift Arrow instructed the men in hunting techniques, weather prediction, and sustainable land management, while learning carpentry, metalworking, and crop rotation methods. Knowledge flowed both ways across the cultural divide, creating connections that transcended old prejudices. Children proved especially receptive. Emma Henderson now followed Martha everywhere, soaking up Lakota words and remedies with a child's natural curiosity, while two Lakota boys apprenticed with the town blacksmith, fascinated by the transformation of metal. As they neared the trading post, Richard Henderson emerged to meet them, his expression troubled. "Riders coming from the east," he reported. "Army uniforms, not Wilson's patrol, different insignia." Martha felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Captain Wilson had been supportive, but they had no guarantees his superiors shared his tolerance for their experiment. "How many?" Thomas asked. "At least 12, well-armed." Swift Arrow's face remained impassive, but Martha noted the tension in his shoulders. "I should return to my lodge," he said quietly. "Army officers do not always distinguish between friendly and hostile Lakota." "No," Martha said firmly. "We face this together, as we've faced everything else. You're a recognized representative under the agreement. Captain Wilson's reports protect you." Thomas nodded agreement. "Running would only suggest guilt, where none exists. Better to meet them openly." The three walked to Clearwater's main street to await the approaching patrol. Sheriff Miller and William Fletcher joined them, along with several other council members. United in purpose, the town's leadership stood ready to defend their fragile peace. The patrol rode in with military precision, led by a stern-faced officer whose insignia identified him as a colonel. He surveyed the waiting group with sharp eyes that lingered on Swift Arrow. "I'm Colonel James Harrington, 7th Cavalry," he announced crisply. "Here to evaluate the situation in Clearwater on behalf of General Crook." William Fletcher stepped forward. "William Fletcher, head of the Clearwater Town Council. We welcome you, Colonel, and are happy to discuss our settlement status." Colonel dismounted, handing his reins to a subordinate. "I'll be blunt, Mr. Fletcher. Reports of your arrangement with local Lakota elements have raised concerns at headquarters. Unauthorized dealings with native populations fall outside established Indian policy." "Our arrangement has authorization," Sheriff Miller countered. "Captain Wilson submitted detailed reports and received no orders countermanding our initiative." "Absence of prohibition is not approval, Sheriff," the colonel replied coldly. "Especially given recent developments." Martha stepped forward. "What recent developments, Colonel?" The officer's gaze swept over her, noting her mixed attire, settler's dress combined with Lakota-style beaded vest and medicine pouch. "You must be Martha Blackwood. Captain Wilson mentioned you prominently in his reports." "I am," she confirmed. "Then you should know that tensions have escalated again between the Army and certain Lakota bands. 2 weeks ago, a supply wagon was raided north of Fort Harrison. 3 soldiers were killed." Swift Arrow spoke up. "Black Elk's band is not responsible. We maintain peace with Clearwater and all who respect our boundaries." The colonel's eyebrows rose. "You speak for these people, do you?" "He is Swift Arrow, official representative of Black Elk's council," Thomas explained, "recognized under our agreement and Captain Wilson's documentation." Colonel Harrington's jaw tightened. "I see. And this agreement permits him to live among you?" To move freely through American territory? It does, William Fletcher confirmed. Under specific conditions that have been meticulously observed. The colonel surveyed the town, noting the trading post with its distinctive design. You've gone well beyond simple non-aggression, it appears. This looks like cultural integration, knowledge. Exchange, Martha corrected, beneficial to both peoples. Colonel Harrington's expression remained skeptical. Mrs. Blackwood, while your experiment might seem benign to you, it undermines official Indian policy. The goal is to move these people onto designated reservations, not encourage them to maintain traditional ways or form independent relationships with settlements. Martha felt her temper rising, but kept her voice steady. And how has that policy worked so far, Colonel? Has it brought peace, or just more graves on both sides? The Colonel's eyes hardened. The difficulties of implementation don't change the policy, ma'am. Before Martha could respond, Rebecca Mitchell approached, leading a group of women including Sarah Henderson, Eleanor Burke, and several others, both settler and Lakota. They carried baskets of herbs and medicines they'd been preparing. Colonel, Rebecca greeted him with quiet dignity, before you make judgments about our community, perhaps you should see what we've accomplished. The Colonel looked taken aback by this new group. Mrs. Mitchell, Rebecca Mitchell. My husband is pastor of Clearwater's church. She gestured to the materials they carried. These medicines, prepared using knowledge from both our traditions, saved 12 children during the summer fever outbreak. The Army doctor at Fort Harrison has requested samples for study. Sarah Henderson stepped forward. My daughter lives. Because of this knowledge exchange, Colonel, as do many others. The display of unified purpose from the women, not just Martha, who might be dismissed as an eccentric but respectable settlers' wives, clearly gave the Colonel pause. Medical knowledge is one thing, he conceded, but what of security? How can you be certain these people won't turn against you when it suits them? Richard Henderson joined the conversation. The same way they can't be certain we won't turn against them. Trust built over months of interaction, mutual benefit, shared goals. Colonel Harrington frowned. Admirable sentiments, but the Army requires more concrete assurances. Perhaps you should speak with Captain Wilson directly, Thomas suggested. He's observed our arrangement from the beginning. I intend to, the Colonel confirmed. He's expected here tomorrow on his regular patrol route. Martha exchanged glances with Swift Arrow and Thomas. This timing could work in their favor or against it, depending on Captain Wilson's current standing with his superiors. In the meantime, Colonel, William Fletcher said smoothly, we invite you to stay in town, observe our community firsthand. Form your own impressions rather than relying solely on reports. The Colonel considered this. Very well, 1 day of observation before I consult with Captain Wilson. That evening, the council gathered in Pastor Mitchell's home to discuss strategy. The mood was somber but determined. If the Army decides to invalidate our agreement, what options do we have? Richard Henderson asked the question on everyone's mind. William Fletcher sighed heavily. Limited ones. We're still subject to federal authority, especially in Indian affairs. Could we appeal to the territorial governor? Rebecca suggested. Sheriff. Miller shook his head. The governor won't contradict Army policy, not with the current tensions. Martha had been quiet, thinking deeply. There's another approach we haven't considered, she said finally. We show the Colonel that our arrangement serves the Army's interests as well as our own. Thomas leaned forward. How so? Intelligence, Martha said simply. Grey Wolf arrives tomorrow with the trading party. Their territory borders the lands where the supply wagon was attacked. They may have information about which band was responsible, information the Army couldn't obtain any other way. Swift Arrow nodded slowly. My brother would share this knowledge. Rogue bands who break peace make trouble for all Lakota. It's worth trying, Pastor Mitchell agreed. If we can demonstrate practical value to the Army, the colonel might reconsider. The Sioux. Next morning, it dawned crisp and clear. Colonel Harrington spent the early hours touring Clearwater with William Fletcher, observing the changes wrought by 6 months of peaceful exchange. Despite his military bearing, the colonel was clearly a man of intelligence, asking pertinent questions about crop yields, health improvements, and security measures. At midday, lookouts reported riders approaching from the west, Grey Wolf, and the Lakota trading party. At the same time, Captain Wilson's patrol appeared on the eastern horizon. "Interesting timing," the colonel remarked dryly. Martha, Thomas, and Swift Arrow rode out to meet Grey Wolf, explaining the situation in rapid Lakota. Grey Wolf listened gravely, then nodded. "We'll speak truth to the army chief," he agreed. "Show the difference between peacekeepers and peacebreakers." The two groups converged at the trading post. Captain Wilson's patrol, Colonel Harrington and his men, Grey Wolf's trading party, and the leadership of Clearwater. An unlikely gathering that would have been unimaginable 7 months earlier. Captain Wilson saluted his superior crisply, though Martha noted the wariness in his eyes. "Colonel Harrington, I wasn't informed of your inspection tour." "A necessary precaution, Captain. Your reports on this settlement have raised questions at headquarters." Swift Arrow stepped forward with Grey Wolf. "Colonel, my brother brings news of attack on an army wagon, knows which band is responsible." Colonel Harrington's attention sharpened. "Immediately. You have any intelligence about the raid?" Grey Wolf met his gaze steadily. "Ghost Horse band from north. 5 warriors led by one called Broken Lance. Not part of Black Elk's people. Renegades who reject the Peace Council's authority." "How do you know this?" the colonel demanded. "They boasted at a water place where many bands gather, showed army weapons as trophies. My scouts heard this 3 days ago." The colonel glanced at Captain Wilson for confirmation. "Grey Wolf's intelligence has proven reliable in the past," Captain Wilson affirmed. "Information shared under this agreement helped us prevent a raid on the Thompson settlement last month." Martha watched Colonel Harrington's expression shift as he processed this. "Military. A pragmatism warring with policy dictates. Could your people locate these renegades?" he asked Grey Wolf. "Could. Would require a tracking party. Territory dangerous. Other bands who distrust both the army and peacekeeping Lakota." The colonel paced a few steps, thinking, "If this information proves accurate, it would be significant. It's only one example of the benefits our arrangement provides," Martha pointed out. "The medicines, the drought management techniques, the secure trade route through former conflict zones." Colonel Harrington stopped pacing. "You've created something unusual here. Problematic from a policy perspective, but functionally effective." He turned to Captain Wilson. "Your assessment, Captain? Without diplomatic niceties." Captain Wilson straightened. "Sir, when I first encountered this arrangement, I shared headquarters' skepticism. 6 months of observation has changed my view. Clearwater's example has reduced violence in this sector by more than 60%. Intelligence provided through their Lakota connections has proven consistently reliable. I believe the benefits outweigh the policy inconsistencies." For several long moments, Colonel Harrington was silent, weighing options visible only to him. Finally, he addressed the assembled group. "I cannot officially endorse an arrangement that contradicts established Indian policy," he began, and Martha felt her heart sink. "However," he continued, "I can classify this as a localized security operation under Captain Wilson's continuing supervision, a specialized approach for unique circumstances." William Fletcher stepped forward. "And our agreement, the trading post, the knowledge exchange?" "Classified as intelligence gathering and regional stabilization efforts," the colonel replied with the ghost of a smile. "Paperwork can be remarkably flexible when necessary, Mr. Fletcher." Relief washed through the gathering. It wasn't unconditional approval, but it was enough to continue their work. As the formal discussions concluded, Martha found herself standing, with Thomas and Swift Arrow at the edge of town, watching as Grey Wolf's trading party began unloading their goods at the trading post. "We've been granted time," she reflected. "Not permanent acceptance, but time to prove that this path can work." Swift Arrow nodded. "Time enough for stronger roots to grow. Next season, new seeds are planted. Season after that, first harvest." Thomas slipped his arm around Martha's waist. "Who would have thought that a blizzard 7 months ago would lead to all this? When you disappeared, I thought my world had ended." Martha leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solidity. "Instead, it expanded. For both of us. The sun hung low in the autumn sky, casting long shadows across the land that had seen so much bloodshed and now nursed fragile tendrils of peace." Martha touched the stone bear at her throat, remembering Grey Wolf's words. Strong spirit needs strong protection. The secret she had brought back from her time with the Lakota had indeed changed everything, not just for her and Thomas, but for two communities that had found a narrow path between hatred and hope. The journey ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges from both sides of the cultural divide, but they would face those challenges together. 3 paths had become one, just as her vision had shown. And though the path might wind through difficult terrain, Martha knew, with bone-deep certainty, that they were heading in the right direction, toward a future where storms might still rage, but where no one would face them alone. As twilight deepened, over Clearwater, lamps were lit in settler cabins and Lakota lodges alike, points of light in the gathering darkness, different vessels holding the same flame, a fitting symbol for what they were building together, day by day, choice by choice. Not an end to their story, Martha reflected, but a beginning. The first chapter in a new narrative, written not in blood, but in the shared language of understanding. And perhaps, generations hence, children would hear tales of the settler's wife who disappeared in a storm and returned with a Lakota brave and a secret that changed everything. A secret as simple as it was profound, that bridges could be built across the deepest divides if hands from both sides reached out to build them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.